fight. We don't have to kill. Everybody in the whole wide world really just needs to chill. No, we don't have to fuss, no, we don't have to fight.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Just Chill with Oliver George. This is episode 76, and for this one, not only do we have a great returning guest who's a very funny man and a good friend, but we also got to try out our first ever remote podcast, which was a lot of fun. Before we get into it, though, I want to remind you, if you're watching on YouTube and you would prefer audio only, you can get that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and other places like that. If you're listening to me on one of those, though, and you didn't realize that there was a visual side to this show, then please come check it out here on YouTube. If you decide to come over to YouTube, I would really appreciate it if you would consider hitting that subscribe button. You don't have to, but it does really mean a lot to me. I love making this show, and I love connecting with new viewers and listeners. So if you've supported me in any way, or you're just jumping in right now, thanks so much for checking it out. Finally, if you want to hit me up, maybe you've got a cool guest idea or some general feedback about the show, you can send me an email at justchillpodcasting@gmail.com. And while you're doing that, let me know if you have any interest in one of these holofoil stickers with our show's logo, and I will mail you one free of charge. Back to this episode, I had such a fun time hanging out with the one and only magnificent Mr. Michael Lifshitz, which I'm realizing now makes him sound like he's a magician or something. But no, he's a very funny comedian who, if you've watched my show for a long time, you might remember he was on episode 3, almost 3 years ago, I think we recorded that, close to. And even back then, he kind of got screwed because our equipment wasn't what it is now, but we had still a decent setup. And for whatever reason, when he came back for episode 3, something was going on and it was really subpar audio. He was gracious and he still did the interview, but I always felt like I have to have him back on. So now we've come leaps and bounds in the audio department. And I said, let's get him back in here. But unfortunately, Michael's hip issues have now advanced to a point where the stairs to the podcast studio were no longer an option. So we took our Rodecaster Pro, which is what we use to record the audio stuff here. And luckily, it's such a cool little unit that you can just bring it, a couple mics, couple headphones, you're good to go. I think you can do 60 hours of audio on it. This is not a plug for Rode, by the way, but if they want to send me free shit, go ahead. Anyway, so it was very cool to be able to test out those components, but also just being able to catch up with Michael, talk to him about the pandemic, about now being able to come out of the pandemic where he can finally start performing a lot more again. And he actually has a one-man show coming up at the Fringe Festival where he's going to be recording a comedy album. Just so many good things for Michael, and I was so happy to hear it and so happy to hang out with him. So I really, really hope you guys enjoy this chat as much as I did. Okay, well, normally I do a whole intro, but that'll already be added on afterwards. So let's just jump into it. My guest today is the wonderful Michael Lifshitz.
Hey, Oliver, thank you for having me.
How have you been, man? It's been ages since we've done something like this.
Yeah, I know. The pandemic, I feel like everybody I meet, I was like, oh my God, I'm for ages.
Yeah, I know. It feels like a lifetime.
Yeah, because the last time we spoke was... And never mind the podcast. I think last time I saw you was before the pandemic.
I might have seen you at a comedy show. Or you weren't really going to a lot of comedy shows, though, during the pandemic. You couldn't.
I wasn't, right? Because until Yucks became accessible, I wasn't really going.
I know I've like messenger chatted with you a bunch. But yeah, I mean, when you came on the podcast, it was the 3rd episode ever. And it was 2019, I want to say like September or October or something like that. Is that
probably.
Right? Maybe August. I don't know.
It definitely was pre-winter because I remember it rained, which is why. Yeah, I remember you lent me a towel that I finally.
Yeah, you finally brought the towel back. That's hilarious.
I finally gave you back the towel
in a nice little gift bag.
I tell you, well, after 2 years, I figured maybe he won't realize it's the same towel, and I'll think I actually bought him a gift.
I didn't care about the towel that much, but I still think it's hilarious that you brought it.
It's been sitting in my car, so I'm like, one of these days I'll drop it off.
To explain a little further, last time you came to the studio, and you left your chair outside, and we didn't think it was going to rain, and then it ended up getting rained on. So that's where the towel came in. But I do appreciate getting it back. And last time you were able to come into the studio, you had your cane and you came down the stairs. This time, it's not so much because I understand that since I've seen you last, you had an operation that sort of made that.
So they didn't actually have an operation.
Oh, you didn't?
So part of the disability was, it was what's called, for those who missed the first one, it's a condition called multiple congenital musculoskeletal abnormalities, which is a long way of saying that certain abnormalities with my skeleton happened.
Yeah.
So part of it is what's called hip dysplasia. So I had no hip sockets. So my hips were actually constructed.
From birth, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I had no hip sockets, and they made hip sockets.
That's crazy.
Was I'd like to say, not only did I play with Lego, I was Lego. You just kind of snap it together.
Or like an action figure or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The Lego figurines that you like snap the legs on, I always identified with that. But yeah, they constructed hips. So the plan was that the hips were supposed to last me till I finished school. And I'm now 40. I'm going to be 47 in September. So I haven't figured out if I'm on borrowed time.
Yeah, you got some extra mileage out of that.
Extra mileage, or my doctor just thought I was an idiot and it would take me this long to finish school. I'm not sure which one. I'd like to believe the first one. Basically my hip, as we were going, basically people thought it seemed kind of sudden, but like I had been deteriorating over the years. Like if you remember when I was at Yuck Yucks, like when I first came to Ottawa, I would go back and forth, go to the green room, go wherever. And then slowly I started moving less and less around Yuck Yucks.
Yeah.
So by the end, I would sit on the bench by the door instead of going to the green room because I'm like, okay, or I'd leave my jacket on the bench so I could get it on the way out, so I could do less steps. So the stairs became more and more of an issue. And now, like basically when I'm in my apartment, I walk with a walker.
So the pain just got extra unbearable?
Yeah, like basically the joint is completely worn out. So here's what's interesting. Our healthcare system, we basically have, so I asked my family, the amount of waste is just phenomenal. Like I asked my doctor to go to a hip specialist and he referred me to a joint replacement clinic. And I get a virtual appointment with the physio and she goes, I don't understand your x-rays. So like my x-rays, the hips, because they were constructed, didn't look normal. Like my right hip, honest to God, looks more like a shoulder than a hip.
Crazy.
So
what do they make the fake hips out of? Do you know?
They just take bones and put it together.
Oh, okay.
Like whatever is there, they just kind of try, whatever you have, they kind of try to make it happen. So the physio said you should see the hip specialist. I'm like, yeah, that's what I asked for.
Sorry, when you're saying they're constructed with bone, are you saying bones from other parts of your body or like donor bones?
Like what was it? What was
they
there?
Just kind of rework?
They reworked what was there to try and make something resembling a hip, right?
Okay.
And they also did that with my right knee. So, like they took there's two big bones. There's two bones, the tibia and the fibula.
Yep.
I was missing the tibia, so they took the fibula and made it into a sort of knee joint that I would have some sort of functioning knee.
I think you might have touched on some of this last time around, but
I might have. I know I said abnormalities. I don't know if I went in detail.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I couldn't remember exactly what we talked about either, but I knew that some further developments had happened since then.
So like basically the hip is completely worn out. So like the physio said, okay, well I need to assess you before we send you to the doctor. So I go to the physio. Oh, and she goes, yeah, your hip doesn't move much. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I asked to see a hip specialist. Because like here's the thing, the physio, then the doctor, all of them said your hip doesn't move much. And I'm like, okay, that was why I came to see you. What are we going to do about it?
Yeah, they're giving you the runaround.
I'm like, okay, I get so like my thing was, where the frustration was, I'm like, okay, realistically, it's not internal medicine. Like, it's not something that you're trying to tell me what's going on inside. I'm painfully aware that my hip doesn't
Yeah, you're living it every day.
I'm willing to bet most people watch me walk. Your hip, like a kid on the street probably could tell that my hip doesn't move well. So that was a little frustrating. And then what was funny was I asked my doctor, could I have, would physio help? And he's like, yeah, that probably would help. I could write you a prescription for that. And I'm like, okay, why am I the one coming up with these solutions?
Yeah, really.
And I actually was laughing because I'm like, when I saw the physio, instead of just punching my card and going, yeah, your hip doesn't work, how about coming up with, well, let's try and do some physio. So physio has helped a bit. cortisone helps manage the pain. The challenge with cortisone is that is good for 3 months. But with our healthcare system, I'm now on 6. They ordered 2 in December. I'm still waiting for an appointment. Never mind actually getting it done.
This is like a shot?
Yeah, so they inject cortisone into the joint, which is surprisingly less painful than you would actually think. Because I was all nervous when I went. And by the end, I'm like, that's it?
Give me some more.
I would have done that sooner. So I'm waiting. I have a follow-up doctor's appointment in June. So I'm waiting to see. I'm basically going to go see the doctor before I get the treatment, probably.
Crazy.
Which is weird. I think I'm probably going to opt for surgery and say, okay, because they're like, it's up to you, but it's more risky. And so the goal is that basically a surgery would last. They would replace it with an artificial hip, and it would last the rest of my life. So that's why they're trying to wait as long as possible. I'm like, okay, realistically, I think the way I use a hip, I think we're getting pretty close to the point where it'll last the rest of my life. And I'm like, okay, well, there's also a thing of quality of life. Like I'm not able to drive anymore. So
I was going to ask you that because you used to be super self-sufficient with your van.
Because I drive with my left foot, and my left hip is the one that's bad.
Oh, no.
So when I went to the physio, she actually goes, your right hip looks better than the left one now. And I'm like, okay, when the hip that looks like a shoulder is a good hip, that's not a good sign. That explains a lot of the problems I'm having.
Yeah.
My joke was basically I'm going to eat 3 times a week. I'll eat a stick of butter wrapped in bacon, and then I'll be sure I won't outlast the hip. High cholesterol diet. That's my
slow
solution.
suicide. Yeah.
There you go. High cholesterol.
Well, because it would have been great. I mean, obviously, I thought, wow, we've upgraded so much with our tech and all that, and the studios. Everything's better than it was when you came originally. That it would have been so awesome to have you come down there, but of course now the stairs are an issue. So I thought, and last time, of course, anyone who checked it out will remember that the audio, we were having all these issues, and
the audio was disabled.
Yeah, you made a joke about the audio being disabled in good spirits. So this time around, the least I could do was bring our now mobile audio setup and get the good voice quality for you at least. But now the video is a little bit disabled because we don't have our 3-camera setup. So hey, we came to you. It's the best we can do.
We do what we work with what we got.
This is the first remote one we've done.
That's been the motto of my life. Work with what you got.
Well, honestly, man, that's one of the things I love about you the most is for all the challenges you've had to face, you're more of a positive person than a lot of people that I know. Like you always seem to look at the cup half full, and at least in our interactions, whereas a lot of people.
The cup is actually half full.
For anyone listening, he's got a coffee.
Okay, there you go. I forgot.
I know it took me a while to get my head around that. Like some people only listen, so when I'm doing something stupid to the camera, I gotta explain it. Well, welcome back either way, even if it's not totally in the studio and all that, but. We talked a little bit about how was your pandemic, but I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit more, what your coping strategies were, because you already deal with more isolating situations than the average person, just being someone who lives with a disability. So I can only imagine the pandemic was kind of doubling down on all that. Like, did you have any specific coping strategies during the pandemic?
I actually did end up in therapy for a few months. So that was one coping strategy. Because just to add to the pandemic, there was dealing with the fact the hip had went and the uncertainty about what that is and what that looks like. Like, I'm like, okay, am I ever going to be able to drive again? Because driving to a large degree is freedom for me, right?
It affords you independence.
Because otherwise I'm stuck. I mean, there's bus, but bus, you have to worry, like, depending on where you're taking the bus to, how accessible is it when you get off the bus, and then are you going to wheeling to wherever you're going, is that accessible? Are the sidewalks accessible? Like,
so
these are
much
all
stuff
things you have to think about, right?
Tons of people don't think about it at all. I know I never thought about that stuff until you and me became friends, and now I look at a lot of those things very differently.
And then there's like paratranspo, so you can take paratranspo, but that adds on to the trip because you have to schedule in advance. And like, if you don't know, the challenge with paratransport, with there's a group arguing about that now, is you have to schedule a day in advance. So like if I was coming to you to do the podcast, I don't necessarily know when it ends, right? So I have to.
Yeah, the pickup time would be.
Yeah, the pickup time is super challenging, right? So there's that. So there's the question.
Not only that, but you have just as much a right as anyone else to not enjoy public transit, just for having to be around a bunch of random fuckers. You know? Like,
and honestly, I don't mind the public transport that much because I find like going to a show, I hop on a bus and I can
during
just let my
COVID, it
brain
was
dream.
not ideal, right? To be
Right, exactly. So I actually didn't take public transit. Like basically, my pandemic was going across the street to the shopping center. My mom lives in the same complex in the other building, so that's nice. So I can see her.
You had someone close at least.
A lot of it was Zoom, right? Like so, our Toastmasters. I'm part of a Toastmaster chapter, so I at least had my weekly meeting that we did on Zoom. So I at least saw people or connecting with friends on Zoom. So like I remember the first. So we had planned a games night in March, and then of course it got canceled because of COVID. And then we're like, well, you know what? Let's at least do it on Zoom. So kind of, we did a lot of movie watching and on Zoom.
You stayed connected though. It sounds like that's the most important thing.
And I think comedy shows on Zoom. I know there's been a debate about Zoom comedy.
Is it real comedy? Yeah.
Is it really comedy?
If there's no audience and.
It's hard without an audience, but if you can get a little bit of an audience in there, I'd say it's better than nothing.
Yeah, some shows were doing that where people would be like allowed to have their mics on, but you're generally obviously not supposed to heckle or anything. It's just to hear the laughter.
Yeah. So what I found, so I had been doing. This was the excellent timing I had the week before. I started a show at a restaurant here in Cobury.
Yeah.
With the idea about having an accessible venue. So it was an accessible venue and it was an accessible show. And our first bi-weekly show was March 3rd, 2020, which was terrible timing to start a show because, of course, and I remember the next show, we're like, okay, you know what? So we started on a Wednesday and then we were going to move to a Tuesday. Or maybe it was Tuesday and we were going to move it to a Wednesday, either or. And we said, okay, you know what? March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, you know what? Let's err on the side of caution. We'll cancel, and then we'll move the Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever it was April 1st. So we had this brilliant marketing idea that we're going to say April 1st. It's no joke. It's not an April Fool's prank. We're going to do a show. And then, of course, it got shut down. So we moved collaborative comedy online, which gave me at least that outlet that I could still do comedy, so that was fun.
You guys did have some in-person shows at different points during the pandemic.
Yeah, so we were online, then we were offline.
Yeah.
We were online, then we went in person, then online. And it got to the point that I actually, on my website, kept two pages, the live one, and because I got tired of changing and remembering what to say about the live.
Yeah.
And so I had like the online and the live.
It's a very different ball game, yeah.
Because it was so the goal was to be accessible in every avenue. So we even had some shows where we had ASL interpretation.
Oh, cool.
So if someone was hearing impaired.
I've been learning ASL, actually. I talked about it once or twice on this show.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
Cool.
just for fun with my son.
Yeah, so there was that, which was a good outlet, because one thing I will say was really tough for me, and this isn't anyone's fault, or I don't begrudge anyone. As things opened up and everyone was posting, hey guys, I'm finally back doing live shows, I couldn't do that, right? Because the live shows, so at the time, Yuck X was not accessible.
It was live on Elgin or something, right? At the time?
Well, so at first it was...
it was the restaurant downtown.
At first it was...
the top level one there, yeah. What's it called? The Italian one.
So I was excited because at first, when they opened, the first time they reopened during the pandemic, they were at Lagos, which was accessible.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So I was super excited about that. I even had a weekend booked. And I was going to do Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then the Saturday they had a wedding, so the Saturday got cut. And then Doug Ford announced Friday at midnight, we're shutting back down. So I basically got to do the Thursday show, just a tease. Basically, it was talk about a mental health fuck, if I could call it that.
You just get to dip your toes and then
it's like you get one show just to remember how awesome it is to perform live, and then it's yanked away from you. And then, of course,
I mean, I know not every venue was accessible, but still, big up to Howie for being so keep adapting every freaking couple weeks. He kept finding a new venue. I
got to give it to Yuck X because Lagos they moved, and a shout out to Howard and Yuck X because when everyone was saying they were back up, I basically reached out to Howie and Chris. And I told him, like, guys, I want you to know why I'm not asking for spots. This is what happened. I can't do stairs anymore. And within I'd say 20 minutes, both Harry and Chris emailed, and we started talking about how, don't worry, we're going to find a way. And so originally Yucks was still at the same location. So Harry and Dan Shields actually had me come for the finale of the 2020 contest. So the tradition was always that the finale would have the winner from the previous year do a set, right? So whoever won the previous
year. Pass the torch, sort of.
Sort of a passing of the torch. So they actually had, four guys carried me down on a chair so that I could come
very
down to
Pharaoh-esque
and sit. And I'm not a light guy, so hats off to them.
Right on. That was live on Elgin, though, right?
No, that was at, so when they first reopened, they were still on Elgin, right?
Oh, okay, that's true.
So it was the second reopening. So they actually brought me down, and Chris had started talking to me about, okay, well, I want to do shows with you, so let's figure it out. And that's where... So we had done one show, and we're actually doing another show on May 20th at Copley, the horrible dark shows that they do. Dark and dirty comedy, right?
Yeah.
So he reached out and was like, let's do a show at Copley. So kind of like you did today, like, okay, you can't come to the club. We're going to bring the club to you. And we did it at
That's
Copley.
how much people like you.
No, so I mean, I appreciate that.
No, of course.
That was very touching. And how he did say about how can we find a remote place, like could we do remote shows that maybe, however frequently we would do shows at an accessible location. And and then Howie did give me a weekend when they moved to Lagos and it was accessible.
But now, like I saw you posted recently that you've got a bunch of stuff coming up.
Yeah. So the way Yuck X is now fully accessible. Right?
Yeah, they're at the hotel.
They're at the hotel, down to the point that they actually break out a ramp. So they literally roll out the red carpet, although the ramp is more of a Paisley carpet. But
whatever.
They get the point, right? The color of the carpet is not important. So I actually can get the wheelchair on the stage.
Oh, nice.
So whenever I do a show, they break out the ramp. And we did do for International Day of Disability, Howie did on the Thursday night a show where I did a preview of the Fringe show that I know we're going to get to.
Yeah, definitely.
But a preview of the one-man show I was planning to do. And the way I found out that Yucks was moving to the hotel is actually Howie very excitedly sent me a Facebook message. Did you see the post? And then I went to look at the group because I think, and this is kind of the way I, you talked about how I coped during the pandemic. At one point, I actually turned off the notifications from all the comedy groups because I'm like, you know what? I don't want to hear what spots I can't do because it's just way too frustrating.
It's just rubbing it in your face, yeah.
Not rubbing it in, and I don't begrudge anyone being able to do live comedy, but it is hard where you share a passion. Like I love doing stand-up. From the first time I was on stage, that's my outlet. Like if I'm stressed, there's just something phenomenal about shutting your brain off from whatever you're thinking about. Either going and washing or going and getting on stage and making people laugh. That's But
Yeah,
I
because at
love
certain
to-
points you couldn't even go watch the shows.
Go-
Or it would have been difficult.
Right. So I just love, and I think it's partially because, I don't talk about it that much, but I do have, like, I know you said I have a positive attitude. That's partially, I'm just a really good actor. Like, I'm human, right?
Well, of
so
course,
I'm gonna have my, I mean, I talk about it, but I'm gonna have my days where I'm super frustrated
Yep.
and depressed and whatever. So comedy is my out. I know what it's like to feel shitty, so that's why I think I
Yeah, I
like
didn't mean to imply
making
that you're
people
some
happy.
like
No.
sunshine lollipops all the time, but I meant comparatively speaking to the stuff that other people have to deal with.
Like
on a
people
regular-
go, "Oh, you're always happy." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just a really good actor." No, but you know what? There's Robin Williams that said, or someone said it about Robin Williams. He knew what it was to feel shitty, so that's why he liked making people laugh, because he knew what it was like to feel bad. So that really resonated with me, because
Yeah.
to me, there's no better feeling than you work on a joke and you get laughs.
Yeah.
And it's like seeing your baby go off and take their first steps.
Yeah.
Right? It's the first steps of the joke. And this is not to belittle.
But helping people escape from their problems for a little bit
Yeah.
too, like you were saying, like
Yeah,
just imparting joy on people.
I mean, one of my greatest thrills was once did a show, and there was a guy who had very severe cerebral palsy, and to the point that a friend of mine who was his support worker asked his mom to bring him to the show because he thought he'd like it. And I mean, he was just dying of laughter at my jokes, and it made me feel good because it was.
Well, he can relate a little more than the average person.
Yeah, exactly. Like making fun of, because I'd like to. So like my jokes are not entirely making fun of the disability, but making fun of what people think about people with disability.
Yeah, misconceptions and stuff.
Which people, obviously, people with disabilities can relate a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I still think that people without a disability can still appreciate.
Of course. And you're doing another thing too, which I think is important, which is people without a disability, you're making them feel comfortable talking about it and learning about it. Whereas a lot of people tiptoe around stuff that makes them feel uncomfortable because, oh, well, disabilities, I don't know what that's like. That sounds very, challenging, and people just try to shy away from that and just ignore it. But you're putting it in their face. Like, here I am.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, And I think deep down that is what people want. They want to talk about the stuff that feels a little bit off limits to them,
It so there was the Mike Ward case, right?
Yeah.
And I remember like some news outlets asked me to comment because they're like, "Oh, a comedian
Yeah.
and disabled."
You know about this, Dad? Before we, well, just for the listeners too, there was a French comedian, and he made. I take it he was kind of a dark comic to begin with, but he made a not so tasteful joke about a boy who was somewhat well known for he had a lot of problems.
Yeah, I believe the
Genetics.
disability was Stresser's Collins syndrome,
Okay.
which affected his hearing and his
visual was a
facial
little
features.
bit. Yeah. It was, low hanging fruit for him to pick on the kid, but it went to court and all that because of the fact that they were trying to sue him or fine him for making the joke. And then the whole argument was like, well, where do we draw the line with comedy and free speech and all of that? But that's interesting. They came to you obviously because you're a comic and you have a disability. So it was kind of like perfect, right in the crosshairs of what they wanted.
So what I found funny about the thing was that a lot of the people who were criticizing Mike Ward, I bet would be the same people who, if they saw me at an event or something, would be uncomfortable to talk to me. And that's what cracked me up. Like, there was one guy who commented on CBC, and I remember he wrote, "You should not be making fun of the sick." And I commented, I'm like, "How did you know I had a cold?" Because a disability is not an illness.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
It's not something I need to be cured from.
Yeah.
And there's actually a whole, which is probably I don't want to go too much into detail on it, but there's a whole movement. So there's a whole question about should you say person with disability or disabled person, and a lot of people with disabilities say disabled person because they don't see a disability as a bad thing.
Oh, interesting. I thought it was going to go the other way.
Yeah, so I kind of see both arguments.
Because person with a disability, you're putting the person first.
Right.
Whereas
and
disabled person, I wonder if we talked about this last time.
I don't know. So like for the longest time, I was like, yeah, I get the person with the disability because I don't know if I told the story, but when I was in Vancouver, there was someone who, I was at a restaurant and the hostess told the person, the waiter, there's just this couple and then the wheelchair.
You did tell me this. Yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
And
the wheelchair. Like you weren't even
I'm like, and I said to her, I'm like, do I get to go in with the wheelchair? Because I'm kind of hungry. But it's okay. I got back at them because when the bill came, I'm like, I took off and go, sorry, the wheelchair doesn't have his wallet. No, I'm kidding. I did not do that. I did not do that.
It would have served him right.
And then I remember
hopefully you
being
didn't give a good tip at least.
Super excited. Well, the waiter was nice, right? So I felt for the waiter. And I did speak to the waiter. And I did explain to them the point, like you may want.
It was insensitive for sure.
But I was amazed because at night I was taking a bus to go to a show, and I got off, and the bus driver, when he opened the door, told the people to wait. He goes, "There's a person in a wheelchair," and I've never been so excited to be called a person, which seems weird.
No, I completely understand.
But last night, so for the Fringe Festival, they do a lot in terms of accessibility, and we actually had a whole workshop last night on access, and the access coordinator was saying that she chooses to use disabled person because it's kind of taking the disabled word back, and that why shouldn't we say disabled? It's not a bad thing.
It shouldn't be this taboo word.
And it shouldn't be, which I kind of see. I'm like, that's
it's
an
sort
interesting
of
perspective.
it's sort of the same argument that you see with the N-word with you know, in the hip hop and stuff like that. I sound so white in the hip hop the magazine. No, but it's the same kind of deal, right? Is like I kind of agree. I guess if you guys want to say it, but I shouldn't be able to say it. It should be like your word.
Yeah.
The D word.
Yeah.
We'll call
and that's so it's an interesting question because I kind of see both sides of the equation, but I find it funny when people get offended. Like, I've had people tell me that my jokes are bad in poor taste, and I'm like, okay, you're telling a guy in a wheelchair, and these are able-bodied people.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, 47 years in, I kind of get, I don't really think I need to be told how I should feel about my disability.
It's kind of how I feel when a dude tries to tell a woman how she should feel about getting an abortion. It's like,
exactly.
This doesn't really pertain to you. I mean, I guess if you're the father, you have some, you should be able to weigh in, I guess. But in general, if you're talking to some random person trying to say abortion is bad, like, well, you're not even a woman. Like, how do you even... Anyways, not to go down. My dad had something to say, yeah?
Yeah, I was just thinking while Michael was talking there about people with specific disabilities, because some of it, I think, is just the ease of using language. When I grew up in Brantford, where there's the school for the blind, right? And so you'd see people out as they would learn how to cope with their disability. But it would be a blind person. It wouldn't be a person with blindness. It'd be a deaf person, not a person who can't hear. It's just easier to say deaf person.
But yeah, we also
blind
used to say
person.
handicapped, and I'm glad that kind of
Well,
fell
sure,
by the wayside.
But it's just...
Or like, people used to use the word retarded for people with mental disabilities,
Yeah.
and so we've grown a lot. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
Some of it is easier, I suppose, to just language-wise. I get what you're saying.
I think people will always go to what's easiest just to say.
Yeah, but
And
that
because-
doesn't make it right necessarily, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So here's my take on, so there was actually a government booklet put out in 2006. And I'm not making this up. This was put out by the Human Resource and Skill Development Canada on proper terminology.
Okay.
And it was that, so for example, a blind person, you're supposed to say person with a visual impairment.
Okay.
Or a deaf person was person with a hearing impairment. And there was a whole book about terminology. And I used to do a joke that it was interesting because I went from being an amputee who could not get on the metro in Montreal to a person with an amputation who could not get into the metro in Montreal, which begs the question, instead of paying money for the booklet, could they have paid money for elevators to the metro? So like sometimes I feel like words do matter, but I also feel like sometimes instead of what terminology, instead of focusing on the terminology, let's not make a nice label for a shitty attitude. Like, for example, whether a girl says he's handicapped, Michael's handicapped, so I can't go out with him, or Michael's a person with a disability, so I can't go out with him. Either way, my sex life is going to suck.
I get the point you're making, though. That, like, it's intent versus, you could have the best words, but you could still be an asshole about it.
Like, I'll be honest, sometimes I will use the word retarded, but it's not for intellectually disabled.
No.
It's usually in reference to something the government does. Because there's intellectually disabled, and then there's government policy.
Well, I mean, there's even retarded in the other meaning of just like if something's been the opposite of expedited would be to retard something,
Right.
like the slowing down the process of something. But I mean, we used to say Gaylord was just something for a nice, happy dude. So things change sometimes for the best.
And
I think that's where retarded came from, probably.
Yeah.
Right? He was
slower. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
But we have to understand that when a large group of people are all saying this offends us, and they are the people that it's being used towards, that's when you need to back off and let the times change,
Exactly. Times change, and also things get appropriated for a certain purpose. So, for example, the swastika that everyone was freaking out at the rallies, there was a swastika flag, which obviously is terrible.
As they should be, yeah.
And I'm Jewish. I'm the grandson of Holocaust survivors.
Oh, wow.
So I'll agree that swastika, bad sign. But swastika originally was, I believe, an Egyptian symbol from
it was
ancient
Indian
times.
Indian, I think. Hindu or something,
Yeah,
right?
Hindu.
But it was the other way.
There was
counterclockwise.
So
or
it
something.
used to mean something else.
Yeah, it was a symbol of peace, I think.
But
yeah.
now, well, it actually meant something completely opposite of what it's come to mean. But
And Hitler perverted it.
we've
yeah.
all agreed that because it's become associated with
Sometimes there's no going back.
horrible
Yeah, you
things
can't, we're not
that-
taking back the swastika.
you can't really take back the swastika.
That's
So
like
things get perverted, right?
I don't know if you have ever seen Clerks 2? They kind of make a joke on all that because the one guy, Randall, he's trying to take back the term porch monkeys because according to him, his grandmother used to use it as a term of endearment and like, oh, it's just a term for lazy people. And that's the whole joke there is he's trying to take it back. And they're like, you can't take it back. Like, we're not taking it back.
At a certain point, I think it would pass taking things
The
back.
funniest part about that too is Wanda Sykes comes in with her husband or her character, whatever, and they see he's got Porch Monkeys for Life on the back of his work uniform. They're at a burger shop or whatever. And the funniest part to me is she starts going off on him, and the husband just wants the food. And he's just like, no, honey, because they're like, we'll give you all your food for free. I'm so sorry. He's like, I don't want that shit. And then the husband's like, honey, you can't taste racism. And he stays calm the whole time until she's like, we're getting out of here, and they don't get the food. And that's when he loses his shit. Oh, it's a good movie, but it was sort of along the same lines, Some things you can't take them back. Well, because I don't want to forget to get into this stuff, I do want to talk about your show at the Fringe Festival, which is coming up in June. You're doing 6 performances, I saw, over like an 11-day period. Yep. And the last 2 are going to be recorded for your comedy album debut.
That's right.
So what, can you tell me anything else that I didn't just cover there? So
it's called Speech from the Throne, Living with a Disability in Canada. And it's basically my experiences living with a disability. We're also going to touch, so I grew up in Quebec. Okay. So the connection is that I do a joke about how I think my disability makes me a better person because I know what it's like. And the joke is that I grew up as a disabled Anglo-Jew in Quebec. So I'd be friends with anyone because I just want people to like me. Like I'm always a minority group, right? So it's really my experiences growing up. We're going to touch on language.
So this is a mix of old and new material. You've kind of just worked it all together?
Old and new, and some I've brought back that people haven't necessarily, because usually I do like 5-10 minutes, right? So there's a lot of stuff that outside of a show focused on disability, I don't really get to do. So there's a lot of different stuff, and a lot
How
of
long
it
is
is
this one? It's
newer
an
stuff.
hour? Or?
It's an hour show. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big step from 10 minutes to an hour.
So it's going to be, and I'm still working on coming up on. I'm debating about kind of having 2 slightly different versions of the show, and then that way have more content to pick from
Edit
for
it
the
together.
album.
Yeah, I think that's pretty par for the course.
But it's basically living with a disability in Canada. So the graphic is actually we basically took the wheelchair and transposed it on the throne in the House of Commons.
Yeah. And you have like a crown on your head or something.
So I have a Mountie hat. 'Cause
Mountie hat,
I'm
that's
like,
what it was.
how Canadian could I look? So I
Stack
went
of
out and bought
pancakes.
a mountain hat, a Mountie hat with a Team Canada hockey jersey. Because I figured nothing says Canada like a Team Canada hockey jersey. Right?
Yeah.
What's interesting, so the idea of Speech from the Throne, so I used to call it Rolling Everywhere with Laughter. And it was like a little guy in a wheelchair and a person on the floor rolling with laughter. And originally the Fringe show was supposed to be in 2020, but obviously that got canceled like the rest of our lives for the last 2 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So originally the first Fringe workshop I went to back in 2020, the organizer said, you need something to help you stand out. So I'm like, okay, as a general rule for everybody, something to stand out so people will want to come see your show. So I'm like, okay. So I came up with the idea of the wheels, Speech from the Throne, a take on in politics. They do a speech from the throne. And the fun fact is originally the idea was that I was going to take that picture and put it on the door of a bathroom. So literally Speech from the Throne.
Nice.
But then my face became too small and the graphic kind of lost its meaning. So I dropped the toilet part. But I was a little disappointed.
Yeah,
I
that would've
had it
been
all
good.
planned out. So we did the photo shoot here at Carlingwood Shopping Centre. And there's a family At the time, I thought they forgot the disabled symbol. But then I realized that's a family washroom. That's why there was no disabled symbol.
Okay.
So I was going to actually stick the disabled on the picture of me on the throne in the wheelchair. Fortunately, I have friends who are good at Photoshop, but it became too small. So I'm like, okay.
Carlingwood, we should say for anyone who's actually in Ottawa, Carlingwood Shopping Center is where Cobry is, where you do
Yes.
those collaborative
Yes.
comedy shows. So if anyone wants to come check that out on May 20th, you said?
May 20th, we're doing the...
It's like an improv style show, right? You told me about this a couple times. I almost did one of
So
them.
collaborative comedy was an improv show. We're not doing collaborative comedy anymore.
Oh, this is the dark
I'm
one.
actually going to be bringing it on. I plan to bring it on to Twitch.
Oh, cool. Right on.
But I
That would
just
be a great
haven't had
platform
time
for it.
to figure out all the logistics of that and the
Talk to
equipment and
Tim.
stuff like that.
Talk to Tim Real. He does his code
yeah.
games on Twitch.
Yeah,
He would know a
yeah.
lot about that.
But it's just a question of timing. So I'm like, okay, after the Fringe, I'll figure that out. But yeah, May 20th, we're at Cobry at Carlingwood doing the Dark and Dirty show.
Yep.
And actually, May 27th, Sophie Hayes is starting a new, what hopefully will be a monthly show at Cobry.
Yeah, I just saw that
called
a few weeks ago.
Food Court Gestures, I
Yeah,
think is
yeah.
the name. Which is kind of cute.
Yeah, the poster
for
just went up a couple days
mall
ago.
thing, yeah. So that's May 27th.
Cool. Yeah, well, I'll try and check out one or both of them. We'll see. I don't know what my schedule is like. I'd have to check, but it
Yeah.
sounds like a blast.
Yeah, so Friday, both are Friday nights. The Victoria Day weekend, we're doing the May 20th, and then May 22nd, the Sunday night at Yuck Yucks.
Cool. Yeah, it's nice to see you have like a lineup of shows again.
I'm like, all right, I actually have enough shows to do a little graphic promoting it, because when it's one show, it's like, okay,
kind of,
here's
yeah.
one show.
A little bit sad when it's just the single one. Yeah.
Yeah. Here's my shows for April. One show.
My
That's all
show
you
for
got.
April. Well, speaking of dark and dirty, this isn't dirty, but it's actually a question from my fiance Kelly. She's been giving me some good ones. I always get one good one from her recently. But we were both kind of like, is that a little dark? And I was like, Michael won't care. But she wanted to know, maybe just one, but you can give like 3 if you want. Places that you would really love to go travel and see, but that you don't think realistically you'll be able to due to inaccessibility issues? Like the pyramids or what have you.
Mount Everest seems like a bad idea.
All right, shoot for the stars. Jeez.
Mount Everest seems like that's probably not going to happen.
Okay, well let's keep it a little more in the realm of like ones that are maybe like you're like it might work, but I don't feel confident enough. Because Mount Everest, I wouldn't be able to make it up there either.
I think I'm probably not alone in that one.
Yeah, exactly.
The pyramids. So actually, I was in Mexico, and I went to the Mayan ruins, the smaller pyramid,
like the Aztec stuff and all that. Yeah.
So there's two pyramids. There's the big one and the smaller one. So some people did walk up. Obviously, I didn't because I'd probably still be there trying to come down.
You guys forgot me. Yeah.
So I mean, like I do travel, and some things I don't necessarily do. So like, for example, in my younger days, when I was more mobile, I actually did a tour of Havana.
Oh, cool.
So I went to Veradero.
Cigar shops.
And then we went on a Havana tour. So it's a funny thing. I guess I'm influenced by CNN. You don't realize how much history and culture there is in Cuba. Because all I knew was Castro and
communism,
cigars, right? But there's actually a lot of cool stuff. So I mean, there was stuff that.
Well, people think of Che Guevara as well. That's another one that comes to mind.
If I got tired walking, so I kind of. There was one. So there was a museum we were at that the elevator was broken, so I didn't walk up the stairs. And I just waited for them at the bottom. And then I remember these two Cuban girls come up to me and start talking to me in Spanish. And I guess the pale skin and the blank stare, they switched to English really quick. And they're like, "Oh, do you need, like, are you lost? Do you need?" And they were being very nice. And if I wanted, like, they can show me around. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I'm waiting for my group to come down. And then there was actually the bar where Hemingway used to go. So that I was too tired to walk, so I waited on the bus, which kind of sucked because that would have been cool to see.
Yeah, that sounds pretty epic.
Where Hemingway was. So a lot of places, so I do travel. It just takes a little more thought and
organizing
planning
and stuff.
into Europe might be a little bit challenging because I feel a lot of the cities are
very
probably
small and narrow and
older streets, and I don't know how accessible they'll be.
Well, they want to preserve a lot of the old cobblestone streets and stuff like that. Yeah.
And you know what? I always laugh when people say, "Well, it's historical sites." Okay, but it'd be cool if a person in a wheelchair could also see the historical sites. So could we maybe try and make it a little bit, keep that old feel with, maybe do a little cutout on the old street to get.
I think the people that have been dead for 400 years will understand.
I think it's safe to say that I'm not going to take a canal ride in Venice, like those boat rides. I'm not sure how that would work.
Or going surfing or something.
I bet you could go to the Nordic countries because, from a social perspective, Sweden, Denmark, all those places are very
progressive.
Well, more so than just about any place else on the planet. So if there's a place that's really thought about accessibility, but you'd have a lot of luck in the Nordic countries.
Probably true.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to make a joke about like the sled dogs or something.
Well, so here's a fun fact. In Denmark, they actually have a program called Sex Regardless of Ability, where the government actually pays for sex workers to go satisfy.
So why haven't you moved there?
Well, you laugh, but that's actually one of my jokes that when I first heard it, I thought, that's terrible. Should a person with a disability not be able to have a loving and caring relationship? And then I thought about it with my other head, and I'm like, I was born in the wrong country. I'm waiting for Jagmeet to get on that. Like, forget national dental care.
Yeah, before I forget, I actually want to say, because we were talking about Everest, I remember my kids telling me 3 years ago or something, they go to school in Barhaven, and they had a speaker come, and he was a guy who had no legs and no arms, and he had climbed Everest somehow. Or maybe he had one arm or something like that, but he was, basically a torso and a head.
It's his name. I
can't remember his name.
His name's Nick.
It might be. It was a man for sure.
It's with a V.
That I couldn't tell you.
I've actually heard the story. So there is someone who did climb
so
Mount Everest.
you never know.
So I guess if I put a team together, I'll be honest, mountain climbing is, because I used to know a guy who does skiing lessons for people with disabilities. And he's like, we could get you downhill skiing. And I guess it's just, all this stuff takes a little bit more planning and coordination. Yeah. So if I wanted to do it, I would find a way.
But if it's not something you're inclined to do in the first place, like, because
exactly.
I don't have the same disabilities as you to deal with, and I still don't really have a huge urge to go skiing or climb a mountain. I hate the cold.
When I had back surgery, I remember the doctor came around after, and he goes, and it was a joke that my dad had heard on the radio, so I figured I'm going to try it on the doctor. And he goes, I go, would I be able to go skiing? He goes, well, obviously not right away, but eventually. I don't see why not. And I go, really? I couldn't ski before. And he paused and he's like, okay, this is a joke, and started laughing.
Yeah. Is that something that I can only imagine it's got to be a fun thing to be able to mess with people a little bit?
Oh, absolutely.
Because people tiptoe, like we were saying, around the kind of things that make them feel uncomfortable, and you can just push all those buttons.
Oh, I love doing that. I do that. Like when I tell people I do stand-up comedy, I'm like, yeah, me standing up, hilarious. And they're like, am I supposed to laugh?
Yeah.
But like going back to the traveling, so I actually went in 2019 to a resort in the Dominican Republic, and with the wheelchair, and I took the wheelchair down, and it was great. It was everywhere in the resort, there were certain places that were a little bit more difficult to navigate.
The beach, I gotta imagine, is not easy.
Going on the beach,
you don't want to fuck up your chair.
I went down to the beach a bit. Like I went down to a path just to walk. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a big beach or water person, so I mean, I saw the beach and saw the ocean, and that was enough.
You get to hear the waves and all that. Yeah.
But like, or like you go to the patio overlooking the beach. That was sufficient for me. But I mean, there are wheelchairs you can go on the beach, and I think the resort actually had one. But again, if it's not something you're that into or interested,
so they do have that. They're like all-terrain wheelchairs that are like
there are beach wheelchairs with bigger tires,
or like even like ones that can go through the forest trails.
I don't know that I would take this chair on it because like you say, I'd be worried about screwing up the mechanism.
Yeah,
but it was interesting. So going, and this is one of the things they talk about in the show, that the wheelchair, there's something wrong. When I had an easier time figuring out transportation for the wheelchair in the Dominican Republic, which I don't speak the language, like there's a language barrier, and presumably they're a developing country.
Yeah.
Than I did in Montreal. So here's the thing: the flight for the resort, if you flew from Ottawa, you went through Montreal, but the planes they use Ottawa Montreal are too small to fit the chair.
Oh,
so I'm like, okay, I took the train into Montreal, stayed overnight, and then got.
But this is what you mean about there's always more preparation.
There's more preparation, and it's weird that the Montreal, like I remember there was a super small cab, and they're like, well, just turn it, and I'm like, okay, but I can turn as much, like basic laws of physics say that if the wheelchair is larger than the space, I can turn it as I want.
I'm not a transformer.
And then they're like, well, wait, let me take out the seat. I'm like, yeah, that would be a good idea. So that's what's weird about like Montreal, Canadian cities, going to Canadian cities, like in my mind, in 2022, I should be able to go to any Canadian city and get a cab from the airport to an accessible taxi from the airport to my hotel.
We should have figured it out, yeah.
Dominican Republic, I figured out there's a company, and granted it was an old white van with an old lift, but it was old, but it functioned.
Yeah, they still had a way to make it happen.
And I was able to get, and then like I got off the plane, a guy who spoke English stayed with me till I got to the guy who took me to the resort, and at the resort got off, and there was a ramp. That ramp was a little steep, and then I found another way in the back where you could get into the lobby. So you find a way to be able to navigate around the resort. And what I tell people is it's the same thing here in Ottawa. Like if I go downtown Ottawa, I know that I prefer that side of the street to this side because this side has a pothole and it's harder to navigate. Why they don't fix the pothole, that's a separate issue.
Well, that's all over the city.
It's
but-
been like at some point I'm like, hey, the pothole's still there. I'm good. I haven't been downtown for 2 years. You figure at some point they would have fixed it. But anyway, separate issue.
It's a good way to orient yourself, at least.
So yeah, I think that goes anywhere. So I think there's probably some older cities that maybe would be a little bit difficult.
Clearly, we still have a lot of work to do. You know, a lot of cities, not just Canada.
So
but
here's what I would say. If I show up at the airport and ask for a wheelchair accessible taxi vehicle, and they tell me, let me see if the bus is available, that's probably not the best accessibility.
maybe spring for a couple more. Yeah.
Like I know I've showed up in Calgary or Vancouver, and by the time I open my mouth to the guy doing the cab, he's already gone. I've called the cab for you.
Oh, nice.
They'll be here soon. That's what it should be. Like
Yeah.
I'm not saying every cab should be accessible. That's not practical. It's expensive, but there should be more than a bus.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, I don't think you're being a diva here.
or
like,
Barry. And I know Darren Frost told you the story when you had him on the show of me going to a show in Barry.
Yeah.
Barry has one accessible taxi with one driver.
oh, wow.
And then the rest is for their equivalent of paratransport. But here's the weird thing. So paratransport, when you go to another city, you have to get paratransport to fill in a form to get. So it's a whole process to be able.
Lord.
And I'm like, I'm not going to go through that much trouble for a 2-day visit.
Well, and all these things, at least in my opinion, take away from what a vacation is supposed to be, which is a relaxing experience. And if you're just all these forms you got to fill out and shit, it becomes stressful.
I mean, like you need 6 weeks to be noticed to be able to get. Like honestly,
That's crazy.
look at like okay. I realize for the people in audio, if I'm sitting in a wheelchair, like I get the fact that some disabilities are not visible. Like I'm in a wheelchair. Like
Well,
honestly,
and you're not just in like
if the
Professor X's basic wheelchair either. You're in like a
power
whole, like a rig.
souped up wheelchair.
Yeah, you can go up and down and all that crazy shit.
If the driver in this city can't figure out that I belong on the adapted transportation, he probably should not be driving a vehicle because something's wrong with his perception. That's a
Some
new
might
joke.
say he's
Okay, it can
retarded.
go in the
No.
show. But
Hey, Michael.
Yep.
This is interesting to me because I've been in several conversations over the years, about what society should do for all the various factions in society who have special needs of one sort or another. And it's the tricky part when I think about it is this navigating between how much you can actually accomplish. Like the example we used to use was if you take the city of Ottawa and you say, you have someone who says, well, everything should be accessible everywhere. And you say, well, if we were to go to every sidewalk corner all throughout the entire city and revamp them, it would be a horrible cost that would eliminate the budget probably for a year or two, versus you recognize that this is the right thing to do. So any work ever done on a corner and any new corner made would absolutely should become accessible. And
Yeah, moving forward. Yeah.
yeah, and the taxi thing is interesting too. Barrie having only one. So sure, Barrie's a good sized city. Should definitely have more.
Yeah.
But it gets to that question around what is the right balance point between doing the right thing for people with disabilities versus doing the right thing for budgetary or off against other needs in the city and all that kind of stuff. Because you get into a small city, like you get to a village, say something of 5,000 people. They might only have one taxi in town. Is it reasonable to expect that taxi should be accessible?
Yeah.
And you go, well, there's only 5,000 people. And you go, you always feel for the person with the disability, but
To
how do you
expect a
hit that
complete
balance?
overhaul of everything immediately is unreasonable, of course.
So here's what my answer to that question.
Okay.
Try.
Yeah.
Make an effort. Get started. And I'll give you an example. So I think it was 2011, the city redid all of Bank Street. For example.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, there's a comic, Alan Shane, who used to do comedy. I don't think he does anymore. I haven't talked to him for a while. But he had commented, and he's absolutely right. When you redid Bank Street, if you had, because supposedly we have a city planning department, supposedly. It doesn't always show, but apparently there is a planning department. If you had the thought to say, while we're building, could we maybe build the sidewalk on a slight slope so we take away all those single step entries to businesses?
Yeah.
Is that a
A
possibility?
little bit of extra cement. Like
Could we do that? And while, because to your point, and I'm sorry, I was going to say Oliver's dad because I forgot your first name.
Oh, it's Brian.
Brian, thank you. I knew that. Okay.
I call him my dad on this show like all the time. I
Okay.
should probably call you by your name.
So Oliver's dad.
Yeah.
To your point, there's, as we're planning things, consider the impact on people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And how could we accommodate that? So if you're going to spend millions of dollars renovating something, could you spend an extra $100 on
I completely get what you're saying.
cement to do a ramp? But I do recognize there's a cost. And like, I know
They were probably like, oh, well, instead, it's much cheaper for us to paint these pride walkways, and then we're checking one minority group box. Because that's around the time I think they did that.
and it's
which
not,
is great, too.
And it's
but-
not to say that we shouldn't have representation for other groups. And that
Oh, I'm just saying they might
is
have gone with that
absolutely-
because that was the cheaper option. And they're like, oh, just a bit of paint, and we look like we're progressive.
and that
You know.
is right. And there is...
Some truth
So,
to that.
so I think there is there's definitely a balance to have between cost and this. So for example, and I think sometimes the problem with government legislation is we go for the gold standard. And then everyone says, okay, we can't possibly afford the gold standard, so we're going to do nothing.
Yeah. Why does it have to be extremes? Yeah.
And what I'm saying is, let's try. You're doing an event. How could we make it accessible?
Yeah.
So maybe, and I know there's people with disabilities who don't agree with me, and everything should be accessible. But I'm the accountant and business owner who knows it's not necessarily practical to do that. And then, like I know before you mentioned Live on Elgin, and I've had conversations with Live on Elgin, and no, they're not accessible. But the reality of the matter is, it will probably cost six figures
They just can't afford it, yeah.
to make it accessible and put in an elevator.
Well, and the other reality is if we were such a progressive society that we were considering everyone's needs all the time, there wouldn't be any homeless people. There wouldn't be billionaires like Elon Musk, and then swaths of people who can't even eat food. So we clearly don't have it figured out. So it doesn't surprise me that
Yeah. And the reality is, if they were to put in an elevator, probably no one would go to Live in Elgin because they'd go under. So I think there's a role to play for government. I think the problem is government comes out with legislation saying thou shalt be accessible, without actually considering the cost involved.
That's why I think someone like you is important, because you're not just the person with a disability or disabled person, however you prefer, saying, oh, everything should be, let's change it all right now. You have a more reasonable grasp on the fact that that's not really, reasonable.
The reality is we spent years putting no money into making things accessible. So let's start a portion of the infrastructure budget each year goes towards making cities more accessible.
Because those little things will add up over time.
And to Brian's point, every time we're doing a street corner, and I think they actually did it on Elgin, because if you notice, when Yuck Yucks after Elgin construction was finished, the step on Yuck Yucks to get into Yuck Yucks was gone.
Yeah.
So they elevated the side. So they finally caught on to, we could maybe address, because the single steps is what bothers me. If it's a flight of stairs, I get it's expensive.
No, but
a
what you're saying,
single
that should be
step-
made into legislation or something. It should be a bill they pass saying all new sidewalk, upheavals, whenever we're going to redo an area, we're going to put these slants going up to the doorways, because it's not going to cost a lot. And if we make it a law, you can't make a sidewalk unless you do it like this. It's a little bit extra cement. I can't imagine it would be break the bank.
And it's so I think it's over time. we're going to get there. And it's hard to be patient. I think the reality is because nothing was done for so long, it's hard to be patient, right?
Yeah, it's easy to be frustrated.
But let's make an effort. So we talked about taxis. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the AODA says all taxis should be accessible. I think that's ridiculous because here's the reality. It can cost anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 to make a taxi accessible.
Yeah. To retrofit it or whatever. Yeah.
And do we need all taxis accessible? Probably not, but you do need a certain percentage accessible.
Yeah.
The problem is, so in Quebec, at least when I was living there, this government, the SAQ, SAAQ.
SAQ is the liquor store, isn't it?
I always mix those two up. The SAAQ.
Very different entities.
Société d'Automobile d'Assurance de Québec.
Yeah.
They have a program where they will, every 5 years, they will pay to adapt your car. So like my car was adapted, paid for the government. So I buy the car and they pay for the equipment.
Okay.
They also pay to adapt taxis. That to me makes sense because the flip side is, what is the incentive to a taxi driver who's already incurring costs?
If he has to pay for that.
If he has to pay to adapt it, is he going to
course.
make the money back? And then what ends up happening is this place is, I once paid $40 to go from the train station to my hotel 2 blocks away in Toronto. Why? Because the driver's trying to recoup the cost of the... So the city should be... So, and I'll give you an example.
Not to put them in that position in the first place.
Yeah, City of Ottawa. Because I've talked to cab drivers and they're like, honestly, I can't afford to. I'm paying my license, my fee, admin fee, the taxi permit, and then I have to pay on top of it for the equipment. It's expensive. So my solution, so the City of Ottawa actually has an accessibility fund. So basically, Uber and Lyft drivers pay a tax on their fees because they're not accessible. So because they can't offer accessible rides, they have to pay a tax.
Yeah.
That tax then goes into a pool of money to pay for adaptations or more accessible transportation. Is the answer that we say all taxi drivers pay a certain tax in order to create a pool of money that then for anyone who wants, we will pay to it?
Yeah.
That may be an answer, but it's a matter of getting creative with solutions and do something. Try.
Yeah, have those discussions.
Have more
at least.
than one driver to drive an who can drive the adapted taxi. Because let me tell you, when he's off work,
He's got COVID for 3 weeks.
what
or
do
something.
I do?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're fucked. Yeah.
We're sorry, you cannot visit Barry this week because the driver went on his honeymoon. Come back next week.
Yeah, that's a little bogus.
Yeah, so I think there's, but yeah, I don't expect everything to be perfect tomorrow.
As long as you see the effort.
But let's work at it. Right?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I just want to check the time.
Oh,
Shit, we're already at 10 to 2. Jesus.
oh, God. Okay.
And it's funny because before we're in like a room in Michael's building, which is like anyone can rent this room out.
Meeting room.
Meeting room, exactly. And I said we should lock the door. And sure enough, there was a lady who tried to fucking come in here. She looked in kind of like this, and then she went for the handle. I'm thinking, what are you doing? Like, are you just gonna come interrupt? I don't know. Anyways. So yeah, I have a few fun questions.
Sure.
We'll try and power through because we don't have a lot of time left, unfortunately. But because our parking we got for only 10 minutes. Shit. What's the weirdest thing you've ever eaten? I thought this was a fun question. And maybe you've never eaten anything weird. I don't know, but
Rabbit and snake. So when I was in Cuba, they had a buffet of different types of meat.
I know they eat guinea pig down there.
It was different. I didn't want. I don't know that I would do it again.
I think a lot of people eat rabbit. That's more common than snake for sure.
But yeah, it was just a buffet of different kinds of meat.
That's pretty out there. I think my dad's tried snake at one point too, in Texas or something like that. All right. Well, that was a good rapid fire one then. Do you have any tattoos?
I have on my spare artificial leg. So my swimming leg.
I don't know if that counts.
I call it tattoos. I don't know if that.
No pain, it doesn't count.
Okay.
Would you ever get an actual tattoo? And if so, what would you want it to be of?
I don't think I would.
No.
I'll be honest, I've had it so much surgery and needles and stuff.
Fair.
I'm like, why get another needle
Yeah,
stuck
that's
in
valid.
there, right?
No, I get it.
But I was pretty proud of the ones on my arm. So the swimming leg has Canadian maple leaves all the way down.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, let's be patriotic. So they were redoing the leg, and they're like, once we have to select, you want to put, because so it's actually meant for kids. So for kids to get used to having their artificial leg and make it a little more fun, they'll do
cool.
like different cartoons and stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. And this is a swimming leg, you said?
So it's a waterproof leg, but I
okay.
use it. I'm actually wearing it now. It's waterproof, but it's also more lightweight. So like for around the house.
Yeah, you wouldn't
I
want it
just
to be
wear
like
that
too
one.
buoyant in the pool. That's all I was thinking, though.
And,
Like the one leg floating up all the time.
You don't want it to be too heavy either.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Exactly.
Anchor you down.
Well, I feel
I'd
like-
rather buoyant than lead.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
See, it's better that I don't go in the pool because I'm the idiot who would take off the leg and just let it float to freak people out. That's my sense of humor.
Oh,
That's
just to
what I
freak
would
people
do.
out. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome.
exactly.
Put a little like ketchup on it or something just to make it extra gruesome.
I thought of doing that. We were on a school
terrify the
trip,
children.
and we wanted to put my leg in the door, and with ketchup packets on the side, and start slamming it, and start me yelling, "My leg, my leg!" But we were the room across from the vice principal,
Oh,
who was
not
the
such a great
chaperone.
plan,
So
then.
we're like, "Yeah, well, maybe we won't do that."
Yeah, we really do got to wrap it up. I'm just realizing because we still have to pack everything up and get out to the parking.
Sure.
But did you have a question, or do you want to ask what we were talking about in the car, or no?
No.
I was just going to ask you if you thought it was cool as a kid that other kids couldn't write the word shit because it would be bad, but you were required to just as part of your last name. Did you ever get a kick out of that as a kid?
So my name's actually been censored on places.
Oh,
like
really?
I once was doing Yahoo Chat, and I put by my name which I'm dating myself. I use Yahoo Messenger.
Yahoo Chat, yeah,
But
Jesus.
I put my name.
Ask
I
Jeeves.
wrote my name Lifshitz, and it actually appeared on the screen as LIF
And then like
star
yeah.
Z. I'm like, oh god.
Man,
but
that's
yeah.
hilarious. Sorry, you did have a question though, or no? No? Okay, nothing. So, well, then we'll ask you the season 3 question I've been asking everyone, which is what, if you weren't doing what you do for a living now, what would sort of be your dream job? And if you don't have one, or if you want to answer both, what did you really want to be when you were growing up as a child?
So the dream job would be a center for the Montreal Canadiens, or any position for the Montreal
Fair.
Canadiens.
Oh, yeah, it's true. You love the
Growing
Canadiens.
up in Montreal, I'm a diehard Canadian, so playing for the Montreal Canadiens.
I saw you posting about Guy Lafleur the other day, too, yeah.
That was probably. Although the way they played this year, I feel could I really be that much worse? But I laugh because if not, I'll cry. No, but I think that the boat probably sailed on that. So, like I said, I'm an accountant.
Yeah.
When I sell or close my business, probably then I'll pursue more artistic ventures, continue with the comedy, the writing. That's
Nice.
kind of my retirement plan. But yeah, when I was a kid, I actually wanted to be an accountant.
Really?
Yeah, I love numbers. I love playing with numbers.
Interesting. Most kids I would not.
Then I
pay for
became an
accountant.
accountant. Well, first was playing for the Canadians.
Oh, well, fair, yeah.
But playing with numbers was probably a more realistic goal for someone with mobility challenges. Probably a good call.
Yeah.
I should get you to do my taxes.
I know, because
I had
then
to pay this year, and that sucked.
Then once I became an accountant, I'm like, yeah. Now I when I was a kid, one of my friends, his dad was an accountant, and he was like really discouraging me, like, oh, you don't want to be an accountant. I'm like, what? No, it looks like fun. Once I became an accountant and started working in it, I'm like,
I get it.
I get it now. I get it now.
What's like everyone tries to bug you to help them with their taxes and shit like that?
That, and also, let me tell you, comedy is a lot more fun than accounting.
Well, I would imagine
it's,
is true in spades.
I mean, having your own business, I think I like accounting better because when you're accounting for your own money, it's a lot more entertaining and interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Pertains to your shit. I get it.
I think this will be the last accounting job I have, and like I don't do I'm down to me and my mom for personal taxes, just because my mom has
You had to cut people off.
the whole I gave birth to you.
Yeah, she can kind of lord that over you
to play,
until the end of time. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's a fair trade-off.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for doing this. It was super
Awesome.
fun hanging out with you, and hopefully we'll do it again. And I'll try and catch some of your shows coming up. Definitely the
Absolutely.
Fringe thing. Where is the Fringe Festival held?
So the Fringe is
Lansdowne or
the
something?
main Fringe is at Arts Court on Daly Street, but my show it debuts June 17th, and it's going to be at the Lab O. And I'll tell you what, I'll give you. I don't know the links that you
Yeah,
can
I can
stick in
copy it
video
all in the YouTube
description.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's at the Lab O.
I'd love to come to some of the
theater
recordings
department at University of Ottawa.
too. Okay, right on. So
Because all the venues are kind of around Arts Court, University of Ottawa, that area, down in the market.
okay, nice. Yeah, like I said, I would love to come to see the recording ones at the very end because then you'll be all warmed up from doing a bunch of shows and
There
probably,
you go, get the
in your
practice
stride.
in. And
Yeah.
so
Man,
basically what Oliver's saying is we want to make sure you got your shit together before I waste my time coming to see it.
I just think live album recordings are cool too. Do you have a
Yeah.
name for that album in mind or no?
So I think I'm going to go with this piece from the
Spring- okay, I wasn't
and
sure.
just kind of a live recording at the show.
Cool.
And then, the plan is, so I'm sure you have friends who always say, oh, Michael, I really want to come see you perform. So my plan is I'm going to put it out on streaming platforms and be like, okay, guys,
You have no excuse.
I've done all I can. And
Yeah.
it's out there. You can watch it. Because that was the thing when we were doing collaborative online. I'm like, guys, literally you can watch it from your house.
You could be taking a shit.
If you position your camera well, you don't even have to put on pants. The plan is to get the album out there sometime at the end of the year.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, I look forward to it, man. And thank
Awesome.
you for
Thank
being
you
a
for
guest.
having me.
High five.
I know they're a little far from home.
There we go.
It was a lame high five, but there's only so much we can do. It's a
There you
different
go.
table than we're used to. Anyways, thanks for checking it out.
Thanks a
Bye
lot.
bye, everybody.